Well, now that we have a quorum, let's begin. Let me welcome you. Let me welcome everybody to the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm the forum's host, creator, and chief cat herder, and I'll be your guide for this hour as we dive into the future of education. This week we have a fantastic guest, and we have many great opportunities for you to share your thoughts, questions, and comments. Before we dive in, let's take a look at the forum and explain where it came from, how it works, what it hopes to achieve, and then we'll introduce this week's guest. So you should know that we are 5 years into the forum. We actually launched a little bit more than 4 years ago in 2016, and we've been growing ever since. We have more than 200 programs. We've had several thousand participants. It's been a wild ride. I'm grateful to all of you for helping participate. Now, if you're new to the forum, you should know the forum is a conversation-based place. This is where we meet to have exchanges of thoughts, views, arguments, support, reflections, all between multiple people. What I'm doing right now, showing you slides for a minute, we're going to stop in just a minute. The main thrust of this program is to introduce you to our guest and give you a chance to converse. Now, the forum is part of an ongoing project called the Future of Education Observatory. Now, this is a multimedia, multimodal attempt to grapple with the future of higher education. It includes this forum. It also includes a regular blog. It includes a monthly trends analysis called the FTTE report. It has a little book club for online, a little bookshop, and a couple of things coming down the pike. If you haven't seen that, just go to futureofeducation.us and you can learn more. Now, we can only do this work with the help of some very generous supporters, and we'd like to thank them for their help before we proceed. First of all, NYSERNet in New York State is a great nonprofit that helps that state's colleges and universities get online and doing great things with broadband technology. They also do terrific professional development, and we're grateful to them for their support. We're also really grateful to Shindig because Shindig makes available the technology that we're using right this second. So if you're new to it, if you haven't been here for a while, let me just show you a couple of the key features. First of all, where I am right now, and where the slide is just for a second, is called the stage. Now, it's called that because everyone can see and hear everything that goes on stage. And you can join us. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Now, right below us, you should see around you maybe 10, maybe 20 different squares, each of them representing one or several people signing in from somewhere on the earth. So you could mouse over them and find maybe they have a silhouette like Prosh does, or maybe you have a video feed like Roxanne does. And if you want to get to know them, you can simply mouse over and learn a little bit more about them, or double click on them, and you can have your own private audiovisual bubble if you'd like. Now, I mentioned that this is all about conversation. How can you do this in the technology? There are two key ways. Look down at the bottom of the screen. There are two buttons I'd like to draw your attention to. One has a question mark, and one has a raised hand. If you click the question mark, that gives you a little box into which you can type a question or a comment. And when you do that, it arrives on my end, and then I can flash it on the screen for everyone to see, and I can read it out loud for everyone to hear. So that's a really handy thing to do if you are in a spot where you don't have very good broadband or if you don't have a video camera. Now, if you do have video and microphone and you want to join us up here on stage, it's easy as can be. Click the raised hand button. That tells us you want to join us on stage. So when the time is right, I hit really one button and pop, you appear beamed up on stage and you get to ask our guest questions. It's really easy to do, and I'll show you how to do it. And that's kind of maximizing the full potential of a video conference platform. Now, if you're a Twitter user and you'd like to keep the conversation going on Twitter, that's terrific. Just use the hashtag FTTE, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the program so that you can ask us questions. Or we find often people who are in the session will tweet out key points that they observe. And sometimes people who aren't in the session, say they're driving or something, will sometimes tweet at us questions that we should be asking. So all of those are ways to participate using this Shindig platform. And we're really grateful for the chance to use it. We thank them. We're also especially grateful to our supporters on Patreon. If you haven't seen Patreon, it's a crowdfunding site like Kickstarter or GoFundMe, and it lets you crowdfund an ongoing creative project. In this case, it's our work in the Future of Education Observatory. So people here on the slide have contributed $10 or more a month to keep all the lights on, the machines humming. Folks like Jeffrey McClurkin, Hugh Blackmer, John O'Brien, Bob Johnson, Michael Hagan, Seth Goodman, Lisa Pritchard, Jeannie Kim Han, and a whole bunch of them. You can join them, contributing as little as $1 a month just to keep everything going. So if you just go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander, you can learn more. Okay, that's what's behind us, and that's who supports us, and that's how all these mechanisms work. Now let's get to this week's guest. I'm absolutely delighted to bring Derek Bruff on the program. Derek is someone whose career I've been following for more than a decade. He's someone whose work has benefited my own. Derek is a director of academic computing at Vanderbilt University. He's the author of 2 books. If you're interested in clickers, he's the author of the first and best book on personal response systems, which I've used all the time. And he's also the author of a brand new book from West Virginia University Press called Intentional Tech, which is all about giving us new ways of thinking about teaching with technology. So without any further ado, let me welcome Derek Bruff. Derek, greetings.
Hi, Brian. Glad to be here. Happy to be on the forum today. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. I'm glad you. So tell us all, first of all, where are you today?
I am in my office here at the Center for Teaching at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Music City, USA, as they say at the airport.
That's right. That's right. Now, we have a geographically distributed audience, so just to give people a sense of where you are, what's the weather like there now?
It is cold and rainy today. We had some snow earlier. It didn't stick. It was kind of pretty falling down, but it was 35 degrees. So, yeah, not enough to actually have decent snow. And there's a giant pit in the yard in front of my building that appeared today. I've heard they're doing some HVAC, some utility work. And so we don't have a front yard anymore. I can see a giant hole out my window now. So
there's bodies that have to be buried.
Apparently, yeah.
Find out. Well, watch out for the pit and stay warm and dry.
Thanks.
We're so glad because there's so much in your career that we can draw attention to. But this is a forum focused on the future of education. So let me ask, looking forward to the rest of 2020, what are the big projects and ideas that are uppermost in your mind?
It's a good question. Looking ahead to 2020, we just finished our celebration of learning. That was a big event we had last week. It's kind of a supersized poster session. Students presenting work from courses all over campus. It's one of our big events of the year. We work with a lot of faculty around this idea of engaging students as producers. Instead of just consumers of information, but producers of knowledge in their courses. And so we've worked with a lot of faculty who've kind of transformed course assignments into more public-facing work, more creative projects, that kind of thing. So it's always fun to kind of see what the students have been up to all over campus. My work is with faculty. I'm a faculty developer, an educational developer, and so we often work with faculty about changes to their courses. We don't always see the impact of those changes. And so our celebration is a nice way to kind of get a sense of kind of how this actually kind of lands with students and what they find valuable. Beyond that, we're looking ahead to retooling our Course Design Institute this year. We do this in May each year for faculty, and we've had it on the theme of students as producers, helping faculty kind of make these types of transformations. This year, we're retheming it around teaching inclusively. As is the case at many campuses, we have a lot of attention among faculty and administrators on diversity and equity. And so we're going to try to help prepare some more faculty to think about their course design through that lens. So that's a big project this year. And then in the fall, I can't say I'm looking forward to it, but we're going to do a series of events on campus at my teaching center around the theme of hard conversations.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, 2016, you may recall, was a bit tumultuous. The last time we had a presidential election in the United States. And so we were constantly talking with faculty about how to navigate these really thorny and really controversial topics in their classes and emotionally laden topics. And anyway, so we're going to try to get ahead of that a little bit in 2020, anticipating another pretty tumultuous fall semester in classrooms. And so we're going to be trying to provide some venues for faculty to share their perspectives and approaches to teaching in tumultuous times.
Wow. Oh, imagine that's going to be something that's, well, I'm really glad that someone with your experience and your sense of focus on students and possibility would be well positioned to help Vanderbilt through that. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and good luck. And I love the theme of students as producers. So I have to ask, friend, I have a couple of quick questions to ask Derek. But please keep in mind, the forum is yours to take advantage of. So as Derek goes, as he speaks, as he raises ideas and mentions projects, think about the questions you'd like to ask. So congratulations to begin with on your new book. It's just terrific to hear, and I think it strikes a great tone, the complexity of the way to think about education and technology. So if you could just tell us what brought you to write the book? What was your intention?
Well, as I say, I do a lot of work with faculty, and educational technology has always been an interest of mine. I wrote that book on teaching with classroom response systems a decade ago. And, for a few years after that, I was known as the clickers guy. I was kind of happy to own that title for a while. I didn't want to be the clickers guy indefinitely. But it was the book on teaching with clickers because there weren't others. So I had the book. But as I continue to work with faculty, both at Vanderbilt and elsewhere, I really enjoy talking with instructors about the ways they use technology and the ways they match tools to their learning goals, to their pedagogies, to the kind of experiences they want to create for their students. And so I just kept kind of collecting examples of these types of alignments between technology and pedagogy. And I would use them a lot in my workshops here at Vanderbilt and elsewhere in my consulting with faculty. And I decided that, this kind of collection of examples and stories was really kind of, there were some principles underneath, right? Kind of tapping into some common principles in teaching and learning. Other instructors seem to find these really useful to help them think through their own teaching. Why am I using technology? What could it be good for? And so I thought, hey, I think it's time to write another book. I think I've got some good material here that faculty find helpful and useful. And so I reached out to James Lang, the author of Small Teaching and Cheating Lessons. He writes for the Chronicle on teaching. And he had just started editing this new series at West Virginia University Press on teaching in higher ed. And I really like James Lang's writing style. His approach in his books is very story-driven. It's very narrative-driven. There's a lot of him in it. And I think their tagline, him and Derek Bruff at the press, their tagline for the series is something like, books on teaching in higher education written by actual people. So I was happy to, I after my first book came out, I blogged a lot. I started blogging and kind of developing my writing voice that way. And it's story driven. It's kind of personal. So I really wanted to write for Jim's series, and they were happy to have me. And so kind of the rest is history. So, yeah.
Great to hear that story drive. That's really, really important.
Right.
You find, oh gosh, I have more questions about that, but since it came out, let's look at the other side. What kind of responses have you gotten? What kind of feedback have people made of it?
I mean, the most fun week was when, the orders started getting delivered and people would tweet out a photo of their copy as they were receiving it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of exciting. And I've started to hear, like I said, my goal is to provide some examples of practice along with some core principles that faculty can then use to kind of figure out how they want to use technology well in their own teaching. And so I think that the best feedback I've gotten are folks who have either read the book or read my blog or listened to our podcast and have started to kind of try some stuff out in their own teaching and experimented with some of the practices or some of the tools that I talk about. And so that's been exciting. I mean, I wanted the book to be really practical, not practical in the sense of here's how to use this timeline tool, but practical in the sense of this is what I can do in my own classroom with my own students. These are things I can start to implement and play around with. And so it's been fun to hear people start to tell some stories of their own about kind of what they're doing with some of these ideas.
Oh, I imagine. Now, so this going to, as those stories accumulate, that's when you come back to West Virginia for volume 2.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, great. What a fun. I just recommend this to everybody. This is a really, really useful and really fun. You organize this book according to 7 major principles.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just walk us through these principles, and then, friends, let me get out of the way and let you ask questions about this. What are these 7 archetypes of teaching and technology.
Yeah, and there's 7 of them because it's a book, and you should have 7, right? Like that's just there's a rule somewhere. If you're going to have 7 principles, there should be 7 of them, and they're not comprehensive, and they're not particularly original, right? I mean, most of what I was trying to do was to make this connection between the scholarship of teaching and learning, educational research, the things we know about how learning works and how teaching works, and then to kind of map that onto these practices that involve digital or analog technology. And so I don't know that any of these will be surprising as principles, but I think some of the applications get really creative at times. So the first one is what I call, I'm using Schwartz and Bransford's language here, creating times for telling. The idea is that if you give students a hard problem or a challenging experience, that can help prepare them to learn, right? So creating this time for telling, getting students ready for an explanation, for an understanding, for something, and usually ready in 2 ways. Ready cognitively, that you've given them a chance to practice, to access their prior knowledge, to maybe conjecture a little bit, and so they're able to understand something that's coming their way. But then also affectively, that you've motivated the thing that's coming, you've motivated the explanation or the telling. So times for telling is the first one. The second one is practice and feedback. To learn stuff, we have to practice, right? And to practice skills, you have to get feedback on those skills. In the book, I tell a little story about my experience trying to learn how to ski. And the first day of skiing, I just fell down a lot, right? It was just, semi-controlled falling. But every time I fell down, I got back up, my body was learning a little bit about what to do and what not to do. And so eventually that process led to some physical skills. And our cognitive skills kind of work the same way, right? I mean, we have to practice and apply and then get some feedback. So in that chapter, I talk about ways to do that with technology. And that's kind of how all the chapters work. The third principle is a phrase I borrowed from Randy Bass at Georgetown University, and he talks about uncovering or making visible thin slices of student learning. So it's really a chapter on formative assessment, right? The kind of assessment we do along the way to understand what and how our students are learning. But I really love this idea of thin slices of student learning. I tell the story of my teenage daughter who created a short film and entered it into a film festival and actually got it in, and we got to fly out to California and see it on the big screen, and wow, she won an award for best drama. It was just, wow. It was a delightful weekend. I couldn't be prouder as a dad. Yeah. And at one point I asked her, like Sophie, how much footage did you shoot for this short film? And it was a 2-minute film, right? So very short, but she shot 3 hours of footage for it or something like that, right? So you have this kind of 90-to-1 shooting ratio, footage to final product. Yeah. And there were so many choices she had to make along the way. What scenes to include, what scenes not to include, which takes to use, how to edit it, right? There's a ton of choices she made that some of them are visible in the final product and some of them are not, right? And so I love this kind of analogy of thinking through the choices students make as they're learning, as they're creating something, and finding ways to make some of those things more visible to us as instructors, because when we have a better sense of what and how our students are learning in these kind of thin slice ways, we're in a better position to respond to them and kind of give them the resources they need. So thin slices of student learning, and technology is good at doing this kind of thing. This is the other thing that I was looking for in these principles are, these are things I saw faculty and other instructors doing with technology again and again and again. Like, technology is good for some things. It's bad at some things. But a Twitter assignment can be a really great way to make visible thin slices of student learning. Right.
Not a deep exploration of the student learning, not a total synopsis, but a thin slice.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. So the other principles, again, things that technology can be good for. I talk about knowledge organizations, that if we can provide students with visual ways to organize their knowledge, they're in a better position to remember and use that knowledge. So looking at things like concept maps, but timelines and other tools that help students kind of see how the pieces fit together. This can be really important. The fifth one is about I was almost going to call this chapter beyond the 5-page paper.
Good.
But I wasn't quite that snarky. I went with multimodal assignments, which is a little more straight down the middle.
Yeah.
Years ago, I did this workshop, and I've only used this visualization once because I think it could get me in trouble. But I'm trying to remember, I had these kind of 2 axes, and I had all these examples of kind of student projects as examples along these 2 axes. And one of the axes was kind of the audience, right? The kind of the more authentic the audience, or the bigger the audience. We had things out here. And then on the other one, I think was something like discipline authenticity, right? Like you can have students. So for instance, if you have students contribute content to Wikipedia, right? That may not be something that historians do. So it may be low on the discipline authenticity, but it's really high on the audience, right? Because you've got a real authentic audience, a big audience out there. And vice versa, you might have, some things where you're having students do the work of the discipline or do the kind of work that professionals would do in that discipline, but it's kind of shared just within the class. So it may be smaller in audience, but more discipline authentic. And after I went through this workshop, this was a students as producers workshop. So we were looking at all these interesting examples of student projects. And then I kind of zoomed out and I showed the axes, and I was like, and look down here in the corner, this is the 5-page research paper. It is neither authentic to the work of our disciplines, nor is it ever read by more than one human being on the planet. So I have lots to say about that. And it was a little, that was intentionally provocative. But the last 3 chapters in the book deal with kind of ways to break away from that mold. And so I've got a chapter on multimodal assignments. When students work with new material and different kinds of media, they're often able to kind of comprehend that material and do more with it, kind of moving beyond just text often. But then also thinking about, I like the term, this term can mean different things, but I use the term learning communities to describe classes in which students are learning from and with each other. So using technology to help kind of help the students kind of bring their own perspectives and experiences and research to the class as a whole and learn from each other. And then the last chapter is on authentic audiences, having students take their work outside the class entirely and share it with authentic audiences of some sort.
So one part of the graph.
Right, that part of the graph. And again, technology, for instance, I'm looking at a screen full of faces and, well, some fuzzy people, right? But, we're all here, right? Technology is kind of gathering us together to learn from and with each other in ways that would be really hard to do without some technology, right? Like to get these 40 some odd people together in the room is a big, heavy lift. But with Shindig, we're able to kind of do this. And so, again, technology is good at some things, it's not good at things, but helping people connect across time and space is something that technology is often good at. So if we're thoughtful and intentional about how we use that aspect of technology, we can then leverage that in our teaching.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you must have those 7 principles even deep in your brain at this point.
They're pretty close, yes.
Yeah. Well, those are so thoughtful and rich. I have questions for each of them, but let me pause my questions and ask everybody else, what would you like to ask, Derek? What do you think of those 7 principles? Are any of those in particular ones that you've used and embraced, be it the student, peer teaching and learning, or the large audience? Or do you have questions about them? Do some of them seem workable or difficult or just strange to you? Or would you simply like to hear examples of each of these? Again, remember, if you're new to the forum, just use the raised hand button to let me know you want to beam up here on stage, and use the question mark to type in a question, and I'll read that out loud and show it to everybody else. While people are thinking about this, I have all kinds of questions about this. I quickly tweeted out a list of the 7 principles, so hopefully your publisher will be happy with this. One question is thinking about tools for telling and time for telling. That sounds like it goes beyond exams and quizzes. Is that in the space of, say, students performing or creating multimedia objects, or students making presentations?
The time for telling piece, it is interesting. Some of these are a little bit more about what the instructor does, right, to kind of set something up. And some of these are more about what the students are doing. And so when I say times for telling, I'm thinking about the experiences that we design and facilitate for our students that kind of move them to a point of where they're ready to understand something. So, for instance, if we want to go back into the world of clickers and classroom response systems, I've got a colleague here at the law school, Ed Chang, who he has a whole series of questions, multiple choice clicker style questions about Carl and Carl's rhinoceros. It's a law class, right? Carl has a rhinoceros, maybe a poor life choice. Lots of bad things happen with Carl and his rhinoceros. And the questions are all about who can sue whom for what, right? And so bad things happen with Carl and his rhinoceros. And so Ed's got this, it is a series, right? And so the first question in the series, Ed tells me, is pretty straightforward. Multiple choice, right? Who can sue whom for what? There's a clear right answer, and most of his students get it. So he uses the technology, right? He's polling his students in some fashion, and you see the bar graph on the screen, and you can see okay, most of the students have this answer. All the students are asked to respond, right? This is a key ingredient. That is kind of what I call an all-state activity. Everyone's invited to it to participate. Yeah. And then the second question also has a clear answer, but students generally don't get it. So they kind of do really badly on this question, and he has to kind of step in and kind of show them what they've missed. And again, very clear from the bar graph kind of where students stand on these questions. And then he gets to this third question, and the students are split. There's 3 answer choices, and they're roughly split every time he asks this question across these 3 answer choices. And you see this bar graph that says, hey, the students have no idea what's happening here, right? Like we're all over the place. And what he says is, he tells them that, in fact, all of those answers are right. They've moved from a situation where the law is clear and settled to a case where the law is not settled, and a good lawyer could argue any of those different responses, right? And so he wants them to be able to make those arguments, right? So part of the activity is to have each of the 3 kind of groups in class kind of articulate why they would pick the answer they did. But the time for telling piece is for students to realize there's going to be cases as a lawyer where things are settled, but then cases where things are not settled. And a good lawyer needs to be able to kind of operate there, but also know when they've moved into that space. Right. And so I love the idea of a multiple choice question as a way to do this, because students don't expect a multiple choice question to have multiple answers, right? It should be just one right answer, right? It's a terrible test question, but it's a great question for kind of creating this moment in class where students kind of get that light bulb and say, oh, right, this is part of what it means to be a lawyer.
Well, that's a great story. I'm going to be thinking about Carl's rhinoceros for a while to come, I think. That's a great way to hack multiple choice. A bunch of questions that just flowed in, and let me put a couple of these quick on the screen.
Yeah, sure.
Here is one from, this is from Blake DeVries, who asked, through your experience, what are the best methods to allow for students to create learning communities?
Methods can go in a lot of different directions, but I tend to think of this through the lens of crowdsourcing. If I'm going to use technology to kind of do this, I tend to think of some kind of crowdsourcing ideas, and even that can mean a lot of different things to different people. But I'm fond of a social bookmarking tool like Digo. That's the one that I use in one of my classes that I teach. It's a first-year writing seminar. So I have these bookmarking assignments for students where I ask them to find resources on different topics or of different types, and then they contribute it to this kind of group pool. I like the group tools in Digo. It works pretty well. And so for a class like mine, this is a first-year writing seminar on cryptography, codes and ciphers. It's a writing seminar taught in the math department. It's about, puzzles and codes, and we do current events, right? We have Edward Snowden week. We talk about the role of cryptography today, which gets us into privacy and surveillance and things like that. And so students come at this topic from a lot of different perspectives. Some of them are interested in computer encryption. Some of them are interested in spy movies. Some of them are interested in World War II history. I had a Sherlock Holmes buff, right? I had one young woman a couple of years ago who, this sounds weird now in today's climate, but she was really interested in Russia, really interested in Russian history and culture and language. And so she found a Russian connection to everything that we did in this class, right? And so, which was great, right? She did a project on, Cold War espionage, right? And so the thing is that by creating this space where I'm asking students to go find relevant resources and share them with the class, and then we spend some time as a class kind of discussing these and digesting these, the students are able to bring their different perspectives and interests in the topic to the conversation, right, to the class. And so the fact that, my Sherlock Holmes buff was really interested in cryptography and literature meant that she directed us to a website that argues that Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland, was in fact Jack the Ripper. And so it's a really beautiful conspiracy theory that is easily debunked, but it has a really nice, because basically you take sentences from the Alice books and you rearrange the letters and you can make it say really terrible things, right? Confessions of crimes.
Yeah.
But that's true for most sentences in most books, right? Like if you have enough letters, you can rearrange them to do all kinds of things. So it was
your book.
It was great, right? Like my book, right? Who knows what you can anagram in there, but it was great because it was a really interesting course connection to the kind of mathematical content of the course. But it came from this interest in literature that one of my students brought.
And so she brought it. And so all of you got to learn about this at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I use that example every year now. Like I hadn't seen that before. And so now I've worked it into kind of what I share with the course. The other thing I like to think about is a collaborative document of some sort. So one of the stories I relate in the book is a colleague here at Vanderbilt, Elizabeth Meadows. She teaches in English and Women's and Gender Studies. And she had her students work on a collaborative timeline. They were using the tool Tiki-Taki. And so a bit like the social bookmarking assignment, there was this kind of weekly assignment where students had to contribute things to the shared timeline. This was a course on love and marriage in the US and the UK over a 400-year time period. And so they were kind of essentially bookmarking all these resources on a timeline, but it was a collaborative timeline. So they were creating a resource that they would then use as a class. And so this is another piece that I think is important, is that she then gave them an assignment that asked them to draw on that class resource in a really intentional way. So this was several years ago. It was when there were a lot of court cases around same-sex marriage happening at the state level in the United States before the Supreme Court weighed in. And so she asked students to pick one of those court cases and then to write an essay about it in relation to this history of love and marriage that they had documented in their class timeline. And so what I like about that is you're essentially asking students to cite other students' sources. Right? The sources that they had found and contributed are now becoming something that the student can work into her paper. And so that's what I like about these learning community tools, is having students all kind of feed their own perspectives and findings into something, and then having them as a group or individually do something with that group resource.
Well, those are great answers. Thank you for the wonderful question, by the way. That's a really, really good question. And I get the feeling that we can press on these with a great deal of depth. We have a video question coming from Stephen Erman. Let me just bring him up on stage. Oh, Stephen, you're muted. You need to activate your sound. Still quiet. Nope, still silent. Yeah, I can't change it from this end. Why don't you reload the page? Just quickly refresh the page, and that might do it. Okay, let's see if he comes back with the microphone on. Actually, see, I'm going to give Steve a minute to do this. And while he's doing that, let me bring up another one of the questions. This has come from Amy Brown. So he's put this up here on stage. He has two questions. She would love to hear examples of each. Plus, how do you address faculty's fear when it comes to adopting new technology? That's Amy Brown at UNCG.
Hey, Amy. So let me give one more example, and then I want to talk about the fear question, because I think that's a big piece. So there's one example I mentioned a few times in the book that touches on several of these principles that it's my all-time favorite example of teaching with Twitter. So I met Margaret Rubega. She's a biology faculty member at the University of Connecticut, and she teaches an ornithology class, a class on birds. And she asks her students to tweet about tweeters. She's, again, so intentional about this. She finds that a lot of the students that come into this ornithology class, they think that all the cool birds are in the Amazon or in Africa or Australia or someplace that starts with A. But she wants them to know that, like, you know, Connecticut has really interesting birds too, right? The bird behavior and ecology that they're studying in the course, they can see in the birds in kind of as they walk to class, as they walk to their jobs. And so she asked her students to take their phones with them and tweet about birds that they observe. And so they have to do three things. They have to kind of say where they are and what they observe, and they have to connect it to course material in some fashion. Mm-hmm. And then they tweet it out, and they use a hashtag bird class, which allows everyone in the class to kind of find each other's tweets. And I like this for a lot of reasons. One, it seems like a really beautiful use of technology to teaching purpose. She wants her students to transfer what they're learning from the class to settings outside the class. And so she's got this assignment that essentially the phone in their pocket helps them remember they need to be looking out for birds, right? And if they see something, they can kind of tweet it out to the whole class, or write it down for later and tweet it when they get to their laptop. But and they really don't need more than 280 characters to do this, right? And it also handles multimedia, so if they happen to get a photo of the bird in question, they can add that. So it's a really nice kind of match there. And I use it as an example of thin slices of student learning. She's interested in how they're learning to transfer outside of the class. And so she asked her students to do that on a regular basis. And then she's using this technology to make their little bits of learning visible to her. So for instance, one of the tweets that I can remember offhand that I quoted in my book is a student who observed, he was golfing and he noticed that there seemed to be different bird songs in different parts of the fairway. And he wondered if, in fact, the fairway itself was dividing birds' territory. And I don't know if that's true, but it's an interesting observation. And he's taking what he's learned and applied it to kind of this context he's in. And so she gets a chance to kind of see how they're applying things. They get a chance to learn from each other. So it's a nice example of a learning community, because students are going to see different birds. They're going to live in different parts of town, right? They're going to travel over spring break and see different birds that they don't usually see. And so they're all bringing a little something different to the assignment, and they get to see each other's observations as they go. And then occasionally, since it's all public, right, it's all on Twitter, like I get to see what they've tweeted about, right? So there's a little bit of that authentic audience out there, but it's mostly this kind of learning community piece and the thin slices piece that gives Margaret a lot to work with as she's helping her students learn the course material.
Those are great examples, and I admired your strengths and holding back from talking about thin slices and golf. That was like
right.
That fun.
This is another case where I've shared this example, and then I've had an engineering faculty member say, "Oh, I teach a civil engineering course. Right. I'm going to have my students take photos of engineering they see in their environment, right, and tweet that out, right?" Or education faculty who have their students in classrooms observing teachers and students, live tweeting their observations about what they see. So lots of different ways to kind of play this out, but I thought it was a really nice example.
That is. Steve, can we hear you?
Can we hear you?
We can hear you beautifully. Welcome, Steve.
Derek. I know you know that the kinds of uses of technology, some of them at least, that you've described go back 50 years, and all of them have been around for at least 20. My sense is that they haven't spread as rapidly as I was expecting them to, 20 and 30 years ago. I'm wondering what you think is getting in the way, and are any of those things something we can do something about?
Great question.
Yeah, well, and this taps into Amy's question about fear, right? I mean, I think this is part of it, is that for a lot of educators, there's a lot of reasons for them not to take risks in their teaching. Some of this is how teaching is evaluated. A lot of campuses, you have to be good enough, but beyond that, there's really no kind of reward system to be, better than good enough. Often the evaluation systems themselves are full of holes and biases and kind of weirdness. So I think that's part of it, and part of it is just human nature, right? Like, I don't want to walk into my class and try something with some piece of technology and it falls apart, and then I look like an idiot in front of my students, right? We've got a lot of instructors who, honestly, like they're kind of comfortable with the distance between themselves and their students. They get to stand at the front and profess and be the expert and have a lot of authority. And a lot of these techniques involve giving up some of that, right? Kind of letting the class do a little bit more, letting the students have more voice and agency in what they're doing. And that can be a kind of risky space for some faculty. I think we have, I'm trying to think kind of your question about kind of what some of the roadblocks are. I mean, I think a lot at my center about the ways that universities provision technology to their campuses. And so, you know, we are the home base for our course management system. We use Brightspace on our campus. We also are the home base for Top Hat, which has a really great in-class polling tool, among other things. Those are a couple of technologies that I think, you know, almost any faculty member can do something interesting with a course management system and an in-class polling system. So I feel like our university should provide those as resources to the faculty. You know, timeline tools, social bookmarking, right? There's lots of other kinds of things that maybe we don't provide centrally, but I think the challenge is that you end up with these kind of teaching cultures within departments and schools that have a lot of inertia. And so I think a lot about how can we lower the barrier in terms of technology access to our faculty. If they want to try something and they want to learn a new tool, they want to get, you know, oh gosh, it's $40 a year. That's not a lot, but it's $40, right? And where does that come from, right? So I think there's a kind of access piece to it. And then I think, and this is one of the reasons I wrote the book, is teaching involves creativity. And
my pleasure. Now, don't go away, people, because I just want to let you know about the next few weeks. So next Thursday, we're going to shift to talk about the most dangerous report in higher education. And this is what a little group out of Boston called EdMit came up with. Faced with horrendous outcries and legal threats, they had to retract this report last minute. What's so scary about this report? What's actually in it? We're going to dive into those secrets next Thursday. Now, if you want to go back and look at all of our previous secrets, all of our previous discussions and programs, just go to tinyurl.com/FDF archive and you can dig back into all of those videos. And if you want to keep talking about this, if you're thinking about intentional technology, everything from thin slices to giving students time to speak, we have all these different venues from Twitter to LinkedIn, Slack, and Facebook. We'd be glad to see you there. In the meantime, keep thinking about this, follow Derek and learn about him, and we'll see you online next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.